Happy Sunday, folks. Welcome back. Here we go. I'm going to assume the audio is good. Unless we get a note that it is not. Okay, just doing a little stuff on my side. See the screen. Okay. Happy Sunday. Today's sesh is the 13th week. So congratulations if anyone has been there, here, there for the entirety. Sorry, it's gonna take me a little bit to warm up per usual. But as I have been doing all of this, it's been really cool just for me to, it's been a great learning experience for me to, put something together, structured, cohesive, what to include, what not to include, how to spin various ideas, how to try to take really old ideas and reframe them in modern context with, contemporary metaphors, etc. So this is great. And then, as I was, starting to work on the nuts and bolts of this presentation, I realized, oh, actually, we've hit that place where we can kind of press pause and like actually fully digest this series like as its own thing, because we talked about the essential practice last week, and today we're going to do an even more simplified suggested practice. And so 13 weeks is 1/4 of the year. So we've actually succeeded in creating a square. We've actually succeeded in creating something that can be thought of as the foundations of an authentic spiritual practice. So this will be the last weekly series for the time being. We'll collect some Q&A. We'll regroup, and then launch either one-offs or another series later in the year. So we're moving forward today, and just assuming that none of us are actually that committed about becoming hyper obsessed with understanding the meaning of life, directly experiencing reality. We've got a lot going on, and we've got a lot of responsibilities, and everything sounds great, and we love listening to the theory, but we don't really have time to do the hardcore practice. We don't really have enough money saved up to like set aside and go on retreat for 3 years, go hang in the mountains, go travel and do all that. So what the hell can we actually do like that's realistic day to day, the most basic thing that represents like like an actual legitimate authentic spiritual practice? And so we're going to talk about today just I'm going to just recommend some things. I, the yogi, have practiced just this in various simplified or like hyper distilled and potent formats. Precious human life, maybe we make the most of it. Heads up, we don't know when that preciousness is coming to an end. We should make the most of it. When we are inspired to really want to make the most of ourselves, to make the most of our lives, it's essential that we find spaces that are authentic, right? And an authentic space will have indicators, marks, and signs of authenticity. The first being that we are the ones who are going to have to do the work. Just being in the presence of the guru or just being in the presence of the mentor is not enough. We should seek mentorship and guidance, but just being in the presence of is not enough. We got to do work. We got to test it out for ourselves. We need to be able to analyze, discern with maturity whether or not even the mentor is authentic or the lineage is authentic. Are there commentaries? Are we being We're being encouraged to debate in order to distill our understanding. Is the location, is it located in modernity? Meaning, is whomever is presenting making an effort to connect to this time and space? Like, what's going on? Is that person aware of the challenges, etc., that are most relevant, right? And the thing that the thing that really actually indicates authenticity is it's going to challenge our conception of ourselves that I'm such a good person or I know what I'm doing, right? Like it's going to challenge us to grow and improve, which is going to require us to step outside of our comfort zone, to set down the limited view of ourselves and others that we have, right? And try to adopt a more expansive, magical view of ourselves and others. And meanwhile, throughout all of that, an authentic space will keep its eye on the traditional ball. It will incorporate the tradition throughout whatever it is presenting. So just final touch for that. Okay, so let's just assume that we're beginners. We're not professional students yet who are obsessed with study and practice, right? Because that is what actually defines an authentic mentor. An authentic mentor will have become obsessed with study and practice, right? The seeker becomes the finder, right? So if we want to find the truth, then at some point, evolutionarily, we will become the seeker, right? Seek and ye shall find. Let's assume that we're not seekers hardcore yet, as I said. That doesn't mean that we still can't practice, right? So it is time to practice. Translation, this is the end of this first series, and therefore it's time to practice. All right, let's move forward here, folks. So what does the actual practice look like? The most fundamental practice looks like reading, writing, and prayer. And so we're going to break that down today. Reading, writing, and prayer is the most fundamental practice. Prayer is the contemplation of the facts of life from the highest point of view. Prayer is not asking some higher thing for something for myself. Prayer is not asking to be blessed or asking to have obstacles removed. Prayer is not asking for something to get easier. Prayer is the contemplation of the facts of life from the highest point of view. Now, what happens? What's the byproduct or what's the mechanics of prayer? Is as we contemplate the facts of life from the highest point of view and become more familiar with what's going on. In other words, as we learn to interpret our environment with clarity, we engage the environment with clarity, and that prevents suffering, right? And so as we engage the environment with more clarity and competence, we suffer less, and that actually prevents us from projecting suffering into the environment. So literally, we save the universe when we save ourselves. So step one, becoming noble. As we become noble, we save the universe. And so that's basically what we're talking about. Prayer is a contemplation of the facts of life from the highest point of view. As we become familiar with what's going on, we literally save the universe. So we will discuss intro to prayer later. Let's get into some fun stuff here. So reading, writing, and praying is basically a contemporary, a modern language that represents what is traditionally called wisdom practice. Now, again, I don't have the slide in it today, but compassion is impossible without wisdom. Compassion is born from wisdom. When we act compassionately, or let's say if we're working the math equation in reverse, we don't want to suffer. Therefore, we need appropriate action. In order to produce appropriate action, we need appropriate thinking, basically, right? And so that's why wisdom practice is always the beginning of legit practice, because it will produce the habits of body, speech, and mind that prevent suffering, basically. Wisdom practice produces, or it creates, the habits of body, speech, and mind that prevent suffering. Okay, so traditionally, wisdom practice is called reading, reflecting, and meditating, or familiarizing, right? And so we're calling that reading. Writing, the best way to reflect on something is to write it down, right? Like keep the mind engaged on the principle. So reading, writing, and prayer is basically reading, reflecting, and familiarizing. Um, Wisdom produces compassion, and compassionate behavior eradicates suffering. That's the idea. Okay. In other words, it gives us um, a sense of purpose, right? There. In other words, when we perform an action that is true, quote unquote, when we perform an action that is true or compassionate, it has within it, the feeling of purpose, the feeling of fulfillment. Okay. That's the idea. And therefore, the more that we do those things, the more that we feel fulfilled and feel that our lives have purpose. Okay. Another way to say this idea is that how we see the world determines how we will be in the world. How we see the world determines how we're going to act in the world. And we've said that from the very first lecture. Literally, we're making the beds that we lie in every single moment. We're creating the beds that we lie in every single moment through our habits of mind and our habits of speech and our habits of body. Right. Moving forward, I really want this to be less, I want this to really be more how to and less like theory focused. So what the hell is it that we should be reading? Well, we should definitely be drinking coffee when we're trying to give super duper fast lectures. Sorry, folks. Okay, so what the hell should we be reading? Well, we should definitely read as much as possible, as widely as possible. Again, contemplating the facts of life from the highest point of view, meaning we should try our best to read something legitimate or authentic from every single spiritual tradition. So we have here a basic reading list from our website called Essential Humanities Literature. It's a little bit focused on Eastern modalities, but we think that's a good thing. So some suggested reading here from Tibet and About Buddhism, listed here: Bob Thurman, Tsongkhapa, Dalai Lama, Shantideva. You can pause these and take a screenshot if you want, or just go to our website and it has it listed there under essential reading. From India, and also some non-sectarian lineages: Tagore, Paul Brunton, Yogananda, Dr. Svoboda. You're going to get a taste of a lot of different things that are not going to be so explicit within the Tibetan tradition, like astrology, the asceticism, the magic stuff is explicit once you've gotten past the door in Tibet, but is obviously more a part of the external packaging of Indian spirituality, the magic, etc. And then for the Western and comparative, we'll notice again. So I really, 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 really would encourage anyone who is maybe not yet, super obsessed, but curious. I would really encourage you to read all of these books, because we'll be able to identify the essence that's trying to be communicated. There's a similar essence that's being communicated across time and space, and so that really becomes apparent when we compare the Tibetan reading list with the Indian reading list with the Western comparative reading list. So encouraging you to do that. Do the thing and you shall have the power. I, the yogi, have practiced just that. What should we be writing after we're reading these? What the hell should we be writing about, right? In other words, what should we be reflecting on? We should reflect on what hits the hardest to us. In other words, what speaks most directly to us. As we're reading a text, we should write down, what we felt was most provocative or clarifying. And then we should try to see if there are real-time examples of that principle or of that idea, and try to connect or unify, the conceptual world with the manifest world, or try to unify the spiritual with the mundane. Um, recognizing the principle, again, wisdom, recognizing the principle, the commonality, and then compassion, recognizing the location, the specified manifestation of that principle. So that's what we should write about. Again, do the thing and you shall have the power. I, the yogi, practice just that. Great. I'm happy that we're moving fairly quickly through today's presentation. Again, how to pray. So if you're setting this up, you could just set a timer and try to do like the same amount of time for reading, writing, and prayer, something that's manageable, right? And so how to pray. So we're going to introduce, again, prayer is the contemplation of the facts of life from the highest point of view. What's happening as we pray, as we contemplate the facts of life from the highest point of view. In other words, as we are earning a more ascended perception of things, we're literally getting closer to God, quote unquote. As we become more and more familiar with the highest point of view, we're literally becoming more like that point of view, right? As we become more familiar with the highest point of view, we become more like that which resides at and within the highest point of view. As we become more familiar, I really cannot stress this math enough. This is the entire game. 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 As we become more familiar with the highest point of view, we literally become more like that which resides at and within the highest point of view. As we become more familiar with the highest point of view, we literally become more like that entity, identity, being that resides in and at the highest point of view. This is the entire game. So this is what, so we have this is our supplement to the 4 cornerstones, the 8 primers. This is basically an introduction to prayer, and that's going to be kind of what today's, this is the meat sort of today's presentation. Just give us a little pause here to digest. In other words, what we're recommending is we're recommending another practice here. So invitation to test, to see if the 8 primers makes you feel better and happier and more motivated to engage the world, and more peaceful and more loving and more patient, etc. Invitation to test, to see whether or not the 8 primers make you feel more peaceful, more loving, more forgiving, more patient, etc. Invitation to test. So what are the 8 primers? Here we go. I'm calling this essential prayer. And again, steps in order. I really want to stress steps in order as an indicator of authenticity. Steps in order as an indicator that a lineage knows what it's talking about. So here we go. 8 primers from the jump. Step 1 is called baggage check. Again, sitting down, shut up, pay attention, and try to imagine that all of the external things that you're juggling, bills, job, relationships, all of the external things, that you're juggling, imagine setting them down. You can literally imagine putting them into a bag and setting them down, like set it down, create distance between sitting down, being quiet, create distance between being centered and what we're juggling. This is called baggage check. And just notice, just if you could just try to do that, like actually imagine, okay, I'm just going to create the distance from the pressure that I feel to pay rent for a moment, or my job, or my relationship with my spouse, or my relationship with my siblings, or children, or spouse. Like just set it down for a moment. Just set it down for a moment. The outer stuff, just put it down. Okay, that's baggage check. Now a little bit more difficult, right? Again, you think of a recipe, you're talking about degrees of like degree of difficulty, right? In other words, the end of the recipe is impossible without the preceding steps of the recipe, right? So degree of difficulty for each one of these, right? It's going to require at least our ability to focus, right? And try to do the thing. So it's a little bit easier to identify the thing that's causing us stress from on the outside, called finances or something, right? So coat check is about trying to identify all of the inner pressure that we're putting on ourselves. I'm supposed to be a good mom, or I'm a designer, or I'm a something, right? So whatever the inner costume narrative that we got going on, just try to just set that down as well for a moment, right? Try to identify. Baggage check is about identifying the challenges of daily life and setting them down. Coat check is about trying to identify the primary narrative or the archetype that we're playing and trying to set that down. And again, notice that it will be much easier for us to actually execute coat check if we have gone through a lecture on archetypes and we can identify, actually, I'm kind of more like that. I am kind of more like that. Okay, so try to identify that thing and just create distance. Try to identify that thing and put that down also. Identify the outer thing, baggage check. Identify the inner thing that I'm holding on to, and check that as well. Okay. So step 3 is called permission. Now, actually give yourself permission to do what you want, be who you want, change what you want. Baggage check. I can see those things over there. Coat check. I can see those things over there. What do I actually want to do? I'm the only one deciding to do those things, to have those agreements. What do I actually want to do? Who do I want to be? How real do I want to be? How authentic do I want to be? How healthy do I want to be? Now shifting gears a little bit. So the first three are really individual, quote unquote, individually focused, right? And then if we succeed in doing that, we will feel some sense of peace. And then again, notice that there's steps in order. Even in the presentation, we will have been from the cornerstones. We'll know that there's something called, there's a relationship between centering and peace and oneself, right? And so these next ones are really about other people. The next 3 are about other people. So peace is about oneself. Love is about other people. So as I set the challenges of my day down, as I set my narrative down, as I give myself permission, actually, I am the one that's doing this. Who would I want to be? Who do I want to be? For real, right? I'm like, anyway, so test it and see. So supernova. So now we're entering the next phase of practice. That's about other people. So direct attention to the object or the person that's most precious, and like try to look for the source of that person. And notice that it's actually incoherent, it's impossible, or it doesn't make sense to only generate reverence or devotion or love to that one thing sitting there, but that there's some crazy magical network that produced the beloved. Okay. Next step is temples. And so now, if anyone is actually going to do this exercise, like actually, like actually what's going to happen if someone gets to step 4, like with a high degree of it becomes skilled at steps 1 through 4, that person is literally going to become more free and more clear or whatever, right? You're going to become more free, more peaceful, more clear. You're going to start to change, in other words. You're going to start to change how you engage the world, how you see the world. You're going to probably have the confidence to start doing things differently, right? And so that means that might represent, a challenge to your existing relationships. Right? And as you start to become excited about who you're becoming and what you want to do, and you start to share that with existing relationships, you'll get the feedback loop. Will someone say, you can't do that, or you shouldn't do that, or something, right? So you run into the courage versus discourage conundrum. Like when we want to change for the better, I've given myself permission to change, and I'm starting to feel more general sense of magic about what I'm what I'm experiencing. And so I want to do things differently, right? And so in order to change, we need the energy of courage. And if we share our aspiration to change with the wrong space or the wrong people in the wrong space or with the wrong people, we will get discouraged. Right? So you're kind of hitting a checkpoint at temples. And so the idea of temples is that, quietly we should examine the quality of our existing relationships, the quality of our friendships, and make a decision as to whether or not we should share with the existing relationships. We should put an end to existing relationships. We should seek new friendships, etc. So temples is about being discerning when sharing plans or sharing excitement about who you feel like you're becoming, what you want to do. Being discerning, understanding that the clarity, the sense of peace, the sense of love that is coming into being within us is sacred, and we should share that in sacred spaces. Again, steps 1 through 3 is about us. Steps 4 through 6 is about other people. So step 6 is called common effort. Remember, every single one of these corresponds to contemplating the facts of life from the highest point of view, right? Everybody has an external life, and therefore everyone can benefit from baggage check, from taking a breath from it, from setting it down and resting. Everybody has an external life, and therefore everyone can benefit from setting down the pressures of the day and taking a breath and resting and recentering. Everybody has an internal life, and therefore everyone can benefit from setting down that inner life, taking a breath and resting before picking it back up. We can all benefit. The 8 primers literally directly corresponds to the contemplating the facts of life from the highest point of view, and therefore will take us closer to God, because everybody has an external life, and everybody would like to engage external life with more competence, enthusiasm, and therefore we all benefit by taking a rest from it before we pick it back up. We all benefit from taking a rest from the narrative before we pick it back up. We all benefit from giving ourselves permission to be as real, as healthy, as joyful as we want to be. We all benefit from that. We all benefit by remembering that whomever we feel is most precious to us came into existence from other people. We all benefit from remembering that whomever we love the most had other causes, and therefore we should incorporate those causes into our love field or our thanking field. We all benefit by examining the quality of our relationships. We all benefit from having the courage to change relationships when we need to do that. We all benefit from being more discerning with how we engage other people, right? And so again, the 8 primers are literally correspond directly to contemplating the facts of life from the highest point of view. This one, particular commonality preference, really does that. And so commonality preference, recognize that every single person, whether it's someone that we love or hate, wants the same thing. Every single person, whether it's someone we love or hate, wants the same thing. Everybody wants to thrive. Everyone wants to experience purpose and have a fulfilled life. Everyone wants to thrive. Everyone wants to experience a fulfilling and purposeful life. Everybody wants to be strong and healthy and clear and happy. Everybody wants that. Everybody wants that. So just remembering that, like as we remember that, it's going to literally change who and how we are, right? Okay. And so these last two, so the first 3 are about ourselves. The second 3 are about other people. And the third and the last 2, excuse me. And the last 2 kind of correspond to generating the aspiration to find authentic spaces for, development, study, etc. The first 3 are about ourselves. The second 3 are about other people. And the last 2 are about trying to find spaces, communities that are authentic, that can help us grow. So GPS shows us a big problem, right? It's like, if everybody wants to thrive, if commonality of preference is true, then why isn't it happening? Why aren't we experiencing the best possible planet, right? If everybody wants to be happy, then why is no one happy? Basically, right? If I want to be happy and I'm not happy, what does that mean? If I want something and I'm not getting it, what does that mean? It means I don't know how to get it. I don't know how to create it. If I want something and I'm not getting it, it means I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to create that. And therefore, GPS is basically taking the knee. Actually, I'm sending out a heart's wish, sending out a beacon for help in some area. I wish to find information, a community, a mentor, an authentic lineage that can help me understand how to live a better life, right? That's what GPS is about. It's about acknowledging that if I'm not experiencing the life I want, I should find better techniques, basically, right? If we all want to be happy, but none of us are happy, maybe we're using the wrong technique. So this is what GPS is about. And then waves, maybe the conscience will give us some suggestion, right? Maybe the muses will give us some suggestion. Maybe our guardian angels will give us some suggestion. Maybe our ancestors will give us some suggestion. Maybe God, the Buddha, Christ, our mentor will give us some inner suggestion, right? The idea with waves is that if we listen, and also if we take the action to seek out, again, seek and ye shall find. But often, if we send out an authentic heart's wish at step 7 in GPS, conscience, the muses, the ancestors, the guardians, the Pleiadian council, whatever, will answer. And then the question is, do we have the courage to take that suggestion, right? Or better yet, what I would recommend, for whatever that is worth, is that we don't necessarily take that suggestion, but we do take action in the world to go to spaces that we've run the Dharma authenticity test for, or we've run the space through that test, and go and try to find an authentic community. If we acknowledge that we don't know how to get what we want, it only makes sense to try to find a community, a lineage, a mentor that can help us experience the life we want. Okay, so moving forward here, again, do the thing and you shall have the power. I, the yogi, have practiced just that. Right. So now let's compress all of this, sort of final recommendations for this phase 1 of this 13-week series. Okay, great. So what should I actually do every day? How do I make this happen? Sorry, folks, here we go. What should I do every day? In other words, the wisdom practice that's going to produce a change in my behavior, that's going to produce a change in my sense of purpose and fulfillment. What should I do? Where should I start? So here are some steps, right? Read, study, and practice. In other words, read, study, practice. In other words, read, write, and pray. Read, study, practice, read, write, and pray. Read, study, practice, read, write, and pray. Read, reflect, familiarize, read, study, practice, read, write, and pray. So we can read essential humanities literature or any of the Ever Center content, would highly recommend. Study steps 1 through 6 here. Practice the 8 primers, nobility training, and or the 4 cornerstones. When we're practicing the primers, nobility training, or the cornerstones, we're also contemplating the facts of life from the highest point of view. That's why practice, can be synonymous with prayer if it corresponds to contemplating and familiarizing ourselves, familiarizing ourselves with the facts of life from the highest point of view. So we're encouraging, familiarization with Dharma compass, 3 principal aspects, stages of the path, the mind-body complexes, and then specific analysis and familiarization with Symphony of 7 and archetypal fluidity. Just a couple notes here, because we're talking about Symphony of 7 and archetypal fluidity, remembering that we have an innate and reflexive response to survival, that it feels when we are really hit with, when we're feeling the pressure of survival, we want to take a break from it and go drink rosé on the beach, right? And then when we spend 10 years rosé on the beach life, we have an innate reflexive response to that. When we become hyper focused on work, we have an innate response to that. When we actually fall in love and realize that we're not going to be able to hold on to the love, we have an innate response to that. When we have the courage to ask, authentically ask an existential question, we become magnetized to spaces that can answer that question, help us answer that question experientially, right? That's what the evolution is talking about. In other words, the soul raised over passion. Once we've transcended our addicted relationship to the satiation cycles, and in other words, once we stop identifying ourselves as the satiation cycles and as the archetypes we're playing, the soul raised over passion beholds identity and eternal causation, perceives the self-existence of truth and right, and calms itself in knowing that all things go well. Emerson, commenting on the last steps of the evolution. In other words, Emerson is making a statement about our own anatomy, right? Our own biology, our own psychology. Emerson making a statement about our own anatomy, our own nature is infinity in time, space, and knowledge. If we were to experience our own super subtle anatomy, we would feel like we're connecting to all times, objects, and satiations. We would realize that it's okay, right? And then The historical Buddha commenting on Emerson, saying also uncomplicated. It's not as complicated as we're making it. It's always here. It's fine. It's extremely profound and amazing, and it's peaceful because everything is a part of us. In the same way that I'm at peace with my elbow, when I experience a visceral connection to something, I feel it as a part of me, and therefore it doesn't threaten me. I'm also motivated to help it if it's in pain. But that's the idea. The implications of our anatomy is that we've never been anywhere. There's nowhere else to be other than at home and at peace with our family. And even though, as we've said, even though we're at home and at peace with our family, they're obviously not feeling at home or at peace with each other or themselves. And so obviously, I don't want to feel like that's the case, right? So we recognize that there's something in the way, something that our mentors are saying something that we're not experiencing. Our mentors are suggesting something about the nature of this experience, but we're not getting that. Legitimate mentors throughout time and space and across every single spiritual tradition have said the same thing about our own anatomy and biology and psychology, right? But obviously we're not experiencing that. So in other words, there's a barrier between us and the truth, and that's why we should practice. We should practice contemplation of the facts of life from the highest point of view. Dissolves, compresses, collapses the distance between ourselves and the truth. And so throwing one other thing here. Right. Anyone who's checked out our content will have also seen this poem, the instructions. So we felt it was good to put it in here to wrap up this 13-week session. First, one meditates on inclusivity. In other words, that things include anything that exists includes everything else that has ever existed. Actually, when you analyze, attempting to find the source of anything that's perceived. How did the tree come to be, or my own body and mind? Where do those originate? What produced the tree I'm looking at? Was it just one thing, or was it everything? Right? What produced my body? What's producing my mind? What's it made of? Right? When we look for the source of anything at all, like at what point are you going to give up? Right? Okay, really realizing one's inability to find any one thing whatsoever that is the cause of any one thing whatsoever before continuing on, we should accept our dependence on everything else, meaning that when I look for the source of me, what is that? And notice that we can't locate it, right? We can locate all sorts of things. My parents, the air, space, supernovas, time, language, whatever language existed before English and existed before that and existed before that and existed before that and existed before that and existed, right? Like every single thing. Like if we had to place a bet using common sense, the crazy thing about it is it actually probably makes sense to bet that every other thing that has ever existed is my birthday, basically. Like that makes sense. And I'm saying, so this is, anyway, okay. So if we're going to keep going, the implication of the instructions is here's how to collapse the distance between ourselves and the truth. Here's how to remove the distance between ourselves and the truth. If we're going to keep going. In other words, how do we erase the distance between ourselves and the truth. That's what the instructions are implying. First, we should try to locate a thing, and then try to locate ourselves and notice that that's kind of impossible. That's the first thing that we have to realize, that it's kind of impossible to locate the source of a thing. This is why it is said that God is ineffable. This is what is meant by that. When you look for the source of something, how do you say everything at one time? You cannot. That is what is meant by God is ineffable. The source of things is ineffable. By definition, we cannot say everything at one time. It's not that it's right. I'm saying it's not any more complicated than that. We cannot say everything at once. Okay, so these are the first step to notice that, man, it's kind of impossible to locate the source of me. And therefore, what if it's probably true that the source of me is right? Okay. The implication with that is that I might have to radically change how I'm behaving towards the source of me, right? Unless I really don't like existing, which is why we don't change our behavior when we intellectually realize this is the big thing too. It's like, right? It's like you can give someone the answer to something. Hey, the source of you is everywhere. Who cares? Right? Notice that we actually don't like existing that much. And so even when we intellectually realize how interwoven we are with our neighbor or stranger or something, it's like, I don't care. I don't like existing. I'm suffering. I hate this. I think we mentioned this like earlier on. So far, our experience of life has been so unsatisfying that even when we discover that we're living and moving inside of God, that I don't hate this stuff. Whatever. Okay, anyway, I'm just getting sidetracked. So anyway, realizing one's inability to find any one thing whatsoever before continuing, before getting closer, we have to accept our dependence on everything else. Then we pray to realize that all suffering is the error of assigning to something that is not, of assigning something to something that is not. Oh, I've been misinterpreting my environment the entire time. The reason that I'm suffering, right? Second step is to pray to understand the cause of suffering, in other words. And is it possible that the reason that I'm suffering or discontent or whatever, not understanding purpose, is because I'm misassigning value. I'm misinterpreting my environment. I think that I'm not connected to my environment, and therefore I haven't taken responsibility to engage my environment, to uplift it, to help it, and therefore I don't experience any purpose. Right? Okay, so that's the second step. Then we meditate. Then the third step is one meditates on the fact that countless precious beings, my entire family, is misinterpreting their experience, and they're all suffering too, and they're spreading it around. Everyone that's in my family is spreading around diseased type of thinking to each other. And so then the fourth step is to try to empathize again. I really want to stress that this is steps in order. And so we have been prepared to take these instructions as personal instructions, right? To empathize with that. To either empathize with it, or if we want to do the radical selfishness, actually, it's actually really bad for me, for all of this violence, that no one cares about each other. That's bad for me. That's preventing me from thriving. The culture war is bad for me. And so I should do something about it. Okay, so anyway, so one vows to put to an end such madness and violence for the benefit of all of one's own family, which includes all beings. So this is the fourth step. I'm going to help solve the problem, even if it's just for myself, by helping reconcile differences, by helping to pacify all of the aggression and anger and resentment, to help clarify all of the confusion. I'm a vow to help put an end, to help clarify all the confusion. Again, notice that this sounds exactly like what we've been talking about the entire time. So fifth, if I'm going to have any shot at pacifying anger or clarifying confusion, I need to become a master of theory and practice. And so I need to find a teacher. Pray fervently to find a teacher who administers antidotes to those who prove themselves worthy of digesting what is offered. And then I'm going to work diligently to prove myself worthy of finding a teacher so that I can actually get that teaching. And then if I have the good fortune of finding an authentic space and I'm doing the work of cleaning out my own crap so that I can actually receive and digest and assimilate, then having completed the bridge to truth, I will experience communion with the truth. That's what, having done the work to clean out my crap and having done the work, the vows and so on, having found a mentor, doing the hard work of receiving, then we're building the bridge. And when the bridge is done, like they say, when the alchemist's work is complete, Elias Artis comes and cosigns. So then, having built the bridge, then we experience communion with the truth. May we experience communion with the truth. Now, how do we know that we're properly practicing? Again, if we're not, maybe I'm not all the way there yet, but how do I know that I'm doing it right just a little bit? Like gravity, we'll feel the effects of successful practice, and the effects, if we're doing it the right way, will feel more invested in the well-being of other people. That's period, full stop. How do you know that your spiritual practice is legitimate? There's only one indicator, and that is becoming more invested in others' well-being. Period, full stop. How do you know that your spiritual practice is legitimate? It will produce the feeling of being invested in others' well-being. And then also oh, cool, if I'm going to have any shot for real of helping others thrive, then I got to really step my own game up. Okay. And then the last two slides for the 13-week session. Hardcore invite recommendation to treat yourself to a 7-day retreat to study and practice and pray. Hardcore invite to treat yourself to a 7-day retreat to study, read, study, write, pray, practice. We will launch a retreat later this year and let you know the details. And every great mentor goes on retreat, not just for 7 days, but for 7,000 lifetimes, until that one lifetime where it only takes 3 years or something, right? The 3-year hyper retreat, or the 30 years of preparation for that, or whatever. Okay. I, the yogi, have practiced just that. You who also seek liberation, please cultivate yourself in the same way. Thank you for spending time with us for 13 weeks. We will see you again very soon. I will set a short timer just in case there are any questions. You'd like me to review anything or anything related to anything for the past sessions? Study, practice, read, write, pray. 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 See y'all soon.